"10 years ago, I lived in a rundown part of Austin in an apartment that's only saving grace was that the rent was cheap. Well, that and the fact that my next-door neighbor was Tim Stapleton. Tim could have afforded a nicer place, even back then, but he looked at things differently than most people. He told me that he didn't care much about material things. He just needed an apartment so he had a place to sleep, a car so he could get where he needed, clothes so that he didn't get arrested. He sounds like a weird guy, maybe, and I guess he was in some ways, but he was a really good guy, too. Over the 2 years I lived there, we got to where we would hang out on the weekends or after work, and I think he enjoyed it, though it was always hard to tell with him. What he told me once was that he liked having something to do other than just wait to go back to work, and I took it as Tim's version of a compliment. And without hesitation, his work was what drove him. He was working on what he called an emergent AI project, and while he couldn't go into the details, it wouldn't have mattered if he had. Even his occasional vague and frantic monologues on artificial intelligence tended to go far enough over my head that I was lost halfway through. Still, I could understand enough to know where he was going. He was smart and passionate about whatever he was working on, and I was happy for him for that. I had moved from job to job for years, and a new potential career is what ultimately led me from moving from Austin a short time later. I envied him with the passion he had and the love he had for his strange work. We had kept in touch over the years, but just barely, and I hadn't heard from him in over a year when he just showed up on my doorstep last night. 300 miles in nearly 8 years' distance from our last face-to-face encounter. He looked terrible. Not just older, but worn through and paper-thin. He apologized for showing up unannounced, but I told him not to be silly and to come on in. I asked if he was okay, and he just nodded, and he made his way to the sofa. As he sat down, his stained t-shirt rolled up enough for me to see a yellowed bandage across the small of his back. I almost asked again if he was sick or needed me to take him somewhere, but he was talking, leaving little space for me to ask anything. Paul, it's good to see you. Yeah, I know I'm messed up looking. Again, I'm sorry for just showing up your house after all this time, but I needed to talk to someone about all this, and I thought about you. But this isn't something you say in a text or something, right? I wanted to talk to you in person. Needed to. Is that cool? Cool. The project, the thing I've been working on for years, the AI stuff. I'm running most of that lab now, and it's given me the latitude to try some more experiments. Different approaches to solving our AI problem. The basic problem in most theories of AI is that they're a lie, or if that's too harsh, they're a half-truth. They rely on semantics and changing definitions to assert that we can create true intelligence when in truth, AI is fundamentally a highly complex set of systems interacting to mimic true intelligence, true will. Because that's the problem, isn't it? Intelligence isn't just about calculating power or memory speed. You wouldn't call a calculator smart in the traditional use of the word. Same thing for a supercomputer or an abacus. They are tools meant to be utilized more efficiently and effectively navigate a set of systems, be that doing 2 + 2 or calculating the behavioral patterns of a group of people off zettabytes of data. The calculator doesn't want anything, doesn't love or hate the plan. Even if you made it look like a person, talk and mimic the responses of a person, it would, at its core, be a fake, a sham. It hides its flaws with the complexity and human affections, but the flaws are still there. Even experiments with machine learning, while very useful for making better tools, cannot replicate true intelligence or will. It will always be a matter of improving imitation, not true replication. Do you understand? I shook my head slowly. He was clearly keyed up about something, but he didn't seem crazy or on something dangerous. To the contrary, Tim was very focused and precise in everything he was saying, but still I was growing more worried. "I'm sorry, buddy, but I'm confused. Are you okay? Did something happen?" He looked at me for a moment before nodding. "I get it. I look a mess, okay? I get it. Okay, so 2 years ago, we had a man nut up at the office. He was a stranger who no one knew, no connection to the lab, and I never knew why he did it, but he brought in a gun and held 3 people hostage and then killed himself when the police tried to get him to surrender. It was terrible. The whole thing was terrible. But it gave me an idea. That day, all the systems of our office, of that part of the city, were disrupted by that crazy man and his will, because he wasn't worried about offending people or killing people or getting himself killed. Whatever his warped ideas were, whatever's driving him, he was operating beyond anything that was intended or dictated by the outside system of our world, law, morality, basic survival instincts, things like that. So I thought, what if you could design an intelligence that didn't rely on systems? Sure, you'd have some foundational system in place like we have a brain, but what if instead of building those systems to follow constants and learn from data and algorithms, you built those systems to learn from what would be an error or fail state to the traditional AI? It could be full of bugs, and it could rely on faulty data. It could break any system rules it needed to break. I raised my hand. "Are you telling me you tried to create an eye based off a crazy person?" He laughed a little and shook his head. "Not an artificial intelligence. A true intelligence. One with its own thoughts and wants, but yes, by most definitions, completely insane. But sanity's a relative thing, right? We're all a little crazy. I wondered if that randomness, that chaos that drives people could also work for it. Would it just result in a broken piece of software? Or could it create something that would truly grow and develop beyond the systems and information it was given?" Tim leaned forward, his voice low. "And it worked. It worked. Within 6 months, I had a functional theoretical model. Another year, and it was coded and ready to begin trials. The day we set it to run was the best and worst day of my life, Paul. I was so afraid it would fail, that I had wasted 18 months and millions of dollars on a project that would either not function at all or would only be another mimic, another scan. But it didn't take long before we knew it was real, that it was alive. We called it the Chaos Engine, and at first me and my colleagues were all convinced that it was the breakthrough that was going to win us all Nobel Prizes and change the way technology functioned forever. It needed to be refined, of course, and taught to be useful, but we were its parents and we would help guide it." Frowning, I stood back up. "Okay, so if what you're saying is true, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but okay, that's a big if. Why would you think that's okay? I mean, did you guys ever watch Terminator? How'd you think it was safe to create an art, an intelligence that's crazy? Don't you know how dangerous that could be?" Tim looked wearily up at me. "We did, but scientific breakthroughs, the really big ones, come with risks, and we had every conceivable precaution in place. Believe me, we looked at every angle we could think of, from both real-world research and discussions from the danger of AI to the speculative scenarios to be found in books and movies. I had no way to interact with other systems electronically or physically. I had no way to connect to other data systems, either wirelessly or physically. It was housed in an underground bunker that only myself and 3 other people had access to, and none of us had seen any signs of apparent behavior outside acceptable limits." "What were the acceptable limits?" Now he looked away. It was very clever. Creative even, which is a term that is not casually thrown around when talking about something like this. But it was also sadistic. Warped in ways we didn't understand, but it was true to its name. It was very unpredictable and chaotic. But over time, we came to realize it wasn't random. There was a method to its madness. Tim let out a sigh. At the time we had concerns, but they were eclipsed by our excitement at what we had achieved. And to be fair, if it was insane, even that insanity was a major sign of success. And this was only Mark 1 of the project. We could refine the Chaos Engine in future iterations until it arrived at something that would be safe in the outside world. But that's when we started seeing all the homeless people outside our office. At first it was a few, then it was more. They would just stand around and stare at us, twitching and mumbling as we passed. They were never aggressive, but it was disturbing. It became more so when we realized that many of them weren't even the same people from day to day. What we had thought were 15 people acting strangely was actually closer to 100. His hands shaking, he buried his face into his hands. Last week they caught my assistant Sandra as she was being escorted to her car by a security guard. The homeless killed them both in the parking lot and ripped them apart in a very meticulous fashion. The police never caught anyone, but the security footage, it's the second worst thing I've ever seen. 3 days ago, 2 more of my colleagues were killed in their homes. Again, torn apart, but this time with parts missing. The lab has been shut down officially, but of course, the engine was still running down there. Always running. He looked back up at me, tears streaming down his face. I went down there. I tried to shut it off, stop it. Some of those people, those servants of that thing, they attacked me. They were babbling in some strange language, and they barely looked human between their slack faces and the bits of metal and wire that had been jammed into their flesh here and there. They dragged me down, and I thought I was going to be torn apart. Instead, I woke up in my bed, my legs and arms feeling like they were on fire, and a strange numbness in my lower back. Standing up, Tim turned around and lifted up his shirt with trembling hands before pulling off his bandage. I can't see it well, but I know something's there, and I needed someone that I could trust, that might believe me enough to at least try and help. I know this thing has done something to me, but I don't know what. Please, Paul, tell me what it is. I bent down and looked at the small white circle that was embedded in Tim's flesh at the spine. It looked like a plastic disc and reminded me of those knickknacks that I'd seen before that were made on 3D printers, except this piece was buried in my friend's back and he was clearly terrified. Edging closer, I saw there was a faint etching on the disc, words that I said without thinking as I read them. Mark 2. That's when I realized Tim's shoulders were shaking. At first, I thought it was from fear or sadness, but then he turned to me, his eyes blazing with a kind of fiery madness that made him look like something far less, or maybe something far more than human. He was laughing. You never asked me what the worst thing I ever saw was. I was backing away now, grateful my keys are in my pocket, and trying to guess the distance to the front door. What are you talking about? I told you seeing those videos of those people being ripped apart was the second worst thing I've ever seen. But you never asked me what the worst was. I was almost to the door now. He wasn't pursuing at all, just glaring at me and laughing as he talked. I'd ask this last thing and then immediately go for the door, hopefully to get to my car before he could react. What was the worst? Tim suddenly stopped laughing as though a switch had been flipped. What the engine showed me, of course. It shows me so many terrible things. I grabbed the knob and yanked the door open, turning as I went, though, so I could run to the car. I half expected to be grabbed at any moment, but I made it to the car and got inside without any sign of Tim. It wasn't until I was pulling away out of the driveway that he appeared at the door of my house and gave me a small wave. Even driving away as fast as I could, I still heard the last words he called out across the growing gulf of night between us. It will show them to you too. It will show them to all of you. Austin that was an apartment that's only saving grace was that the rent was cheap. Well, that and the fact that my next door neighbor